The discriminant is the part of the quadratic formula that exists underneath the square root sign. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. The discriminant tells us how many solutions we're going to have when we use the quadratic formula. So basically the discriminant tells us how many times is that particular equation, that parabola, going to cross the x-axis. If the discriminant is positive, so this first line is talking about if the discriminant is positive. When we do the quadratic formula, we'd have something plus or minus the square root of a positive number. You can do the square root of a positive number and get actual numbers, actual answers. So you have something plus that and something minus that. That gives you two solutions. So when the discriminant is positive, we have two real solutions. If the discriminant is 0, so I'll write equals 0. If that square root is the square root of 0, what is the square root of 0? 0. So whether you add 0 or subtract 0, it's not going to change the value. So when the discriminant is 0, we are going to have one real solution. Then if the discriminant is negative, we have the square root of a negative number. That means imaginary numbers. We still have the plus minus, so there are still two solutions, but this time there are two imaginary solutions. The first three problems on your assignment are going to ask you, what is the discriminant? How many solutions, and what type of solutions? So let's look at number 7. When we're using the discriminant, we're not going to do the whole quadratic formula. We're just doing the discriminant. So I don't care if that a value is negative. So here a is negative 2, b is 3, c is negative 7. We are doing b squared minus 4ac. So 3 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 7. Some of you need to get in the habit of using parentheses around that b value. Anytime you're squaring something, it's a good idea to put parentheses around it just in case it's negative. So 3 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 7. The discriminant is negative 47. In your online assignment, the first question will ask, what is the discriminant? You'd type in negative 47. Then it's going to say how many solutions there are. So since our discriminant is negative, what does that mean for the number of solutions? 2 imaginary solutions. So you'd have to enter 2 or select it from a drop-down and then select imaginary from a drop-down, I think, is how it goes. Okay, try number 8 on your own. Find the discriminant and decide how many and what type of solutions. Okay, so b squared negative 4 squared minus 4 times a 4 times c 1. Negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1. You should get a discriminant of 0. If you forgot the parentheses and typed in negative 4 squared without parentheses, you would get negative 32, which is not correct. Those parentheses are incredibly important, and you may want to write in your notes that parentheses, if I could actually spell it, are important. If the discriminant is 0, what does that mean for number and type of solutions? One real solution. We are going to use the formula h equals negative 16t squared plus v sub 0 t plus h sub 0. So that weird little v0 and h0, that's v sub 0 and h sub 0. V sub 0 is initial velocity. H sub 0 is initial height. The h, you might want to write next to that. It's kind of like your ending height. And t is the time in seconds. We are not going to do part C. If an object is dropped from 200 feet, how long will it take for the object to reach the ground? Reaching the ground would be an end height of 0 feet. This 200 is a beginning height. So if you want to put h sub 0 next to that 200 feet to tell yourself that that is your initial height. So let's write this in. Actually, I'll write h equals. If we write down the formula, then you can write the numbers directly underneath and you can see what numbers go into what letter. Our ending height is 0 feet. It's always negative 16t squared. That has to do with like gravity. Did you see anything in this problem about initial velocity? Okay, it's 0 because we're dropping. We're not like throwing it downward. We are just letting it go. So the initial velocity is 0. Do we need that term at all? No. And our initial height is 200 feet. So really we have the equation 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 200. Do you notice that all we have is t squared? There's no t. That means we don't have to use the quadratic formula. We can add 16t squared to both sides. How do we get t squared completely by itself? Divide by 16. 200 divided by 16. 12.5. And then how do we get rid of the square? And because this is a real world problem, you can type in the square root of 12.5 into your calculator. The nice thing is, because we're doing real world, we don't have to simplify any radicals, we just type it in. Now your assignment is going to ask you for rounded to the nearest hundredth. Hundredth is 2 numbers after the decimal point. So it's either going to be 3.53 or 3.54. The number after that tells us if we shove it up to 3.54 or leave it be at 3.53. What should we do? Shove it or leave it? Shove it. Our answer is 3.54 seconds. In part B, we're really doing the same thing, but this time our ending height is at 30 feet. So this time we are doing 30 equals negative 16t squared. Our initial velocity was 0, so we skipped that middle term, and our initial height was 200. If you're watching the video, pause the video, try this on your own, try to get t squared completely by itself so that we can solve using a square root. Here's the work and answer for part B. If you need help with this, those of you watching the video, let me know. I can walk you through this problem if you need help. So if we're talking about an object that is dropped, you might want to add this to your notes. If we're talking about an object that is dropped, we are really talking about ending height equals negative 16t squared plus initial height. Because when it's dropped, there is no initial velocity. When you have this, you can just get t squared by itself and solve using square roots. A basketball player passes the ball to a teammate who catches it 11 feet above the court. If you're catching something, that sounds like an end height. So I'm going to put the same color on our H on our end height. Just above the rim of the basket. And slam dunks it through the hoop, blah, 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 blah. The first player releases the ball 5 feet above the court. What does that sound like? Initial height. With an initial vertical velocity of 21 feet per second. That sounds like that number. How long is the ball in the air before being caught? Okay, so let's put the numbers where they go. 11 goes in place of H. 21 feet per second goes in place of V. And 5 goes in place of H sub 0. Bless you. Okay, we need to use the quadratic formula on this because we have t squared and t. But first we need equals 0. And because this is a real world problem, I don't even care that the t squared is negative, that we can work around that. So we're going to subtract 11 on both sides to get 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 21t minus 6. So A is negative 16, B is 21, and C is negative 6. I want you to pause the video, take a moment, and put those into the quadratic formula. I did write it over there on the board. You might have to flip back in your notes to see it. One of my amazing students asked, why don't we move everything to the other side so that our A term is positive? If we have to simplify this and get it into something plus or minus 2i square root of whatever, having a negative on the bottom can be very, very problematic. It makes it a lot more difficult to simplify. But this one, it's a real world problem. We're going to type it into the calculator so we don't care. So if it's real world and you're typing it into the calculator to get your final answer, we don't care. If it's something where you have to simplify it down into like 2 plus or minus 3i square root, then you don't want your A to be negative. Okay, always try to do the discriminant. We now know it's called the discriminant first. So 21 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times negative 6. That's 57. So we have negative 21 plus or minus the square root of 57 all over negative 32. Okay. That division bar is a grouping symbol. You have to do everything that's on the top before you divide by negative 32. So I would suggest that you do not try to do this all in one step. I like to do negative 21 plus square root of 57, enter, divided by negative 32, enter. So one of our answers is 0.42. Do that again. Negative 21 minus square root of 57. So do negative 21 minus square root of 57, enter, then divide by negative 32, enter. Our other answer is 0.89. So here's the deal. We're throwing this basketball, and there's 2 places where it's at that specific height. The first one is after 0.42 seconds. The second one is after 0.89 seconds. It says, assuming the ball is caught as it rises, that means we want that one. So the answer we want is 0.42. 0.42 seconds. On your assignment, watch for how it describes the initial vertical velocity. If it says that you are throwing something, it's going to be a positive initial vertical velocity. If it says that you are, I don't know, like spiking a volleyball downward, what do you think about that velocity? Use the negative version of that velocity. hint, hint, wink, wink, there might be a volleyball spiking problem on the assignment. Maybe, possibly.